to move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister deliberately misquoted the Director-General of Security to suit his version of why the government hasn't properly screened people coming out of the terrorist-controlled Gaza Strip. The Prime Minister was also tricky in saying the screening processes his government uses are the same as the Coalition used, when that turns out to be completely untrue. Isn't this why Australians are disappointed in the Prime Minister and now saying that he's incompetent and dishonest?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I have the utmost respect for Mr Burgess. That's why I reappointed him.
Order. No, the Leader of the Opposition has asked his question and was given the courtesy, as he knows, to be heard in silence. Seconds in, we're going to ask the same courtesy to be given to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. For 5 years, following his appointment by the previous government. So we have the same security agencies in place with, indeed, the same personnel. And I'll continue to take his advice and I'll continue to trust our security agencies to do their job. And I table the interview by Mr Burgess on insiders. Earlier today, we had a motion moved by the Leader of the Opposition that asked for the information to be given in this chamber about which visa applicants are the subject of a security assessment by ASIO and what the criteria for ASIO is to carry out security assessments. Now, that's a pretty extraordinary thing for the Leader of the Opposition to do. As if,
Order. Members on my left, the member for Latrobe.
Conversation in, like a cone of silence would descend upon this chamber. This was full get smart
on my
from
right.
the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker. But, of course, he has fallen because it was reported by The Guardian in February of 2022 that the Liberal Senator James Paterson has rebuked the Defence Minister, Peter Dutton, for referencing classified information during last week's hyper-partisan brawling over national security. And indeed, further back was reported by the ABC in January 2020, the Office of Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton was suspected of leaking information it was told was classified about the cost of medically evacuating refugees to Taiwan. It went on to say, so there's a gap here, okay, just to be clear. It went on to say the disclosure of the information concerned the Secretary of the Home Affairs Department so greatly he requested the matter be referred to the Australian Federal Police for investigation. And, of course, we know that on Election Day 2022, that's right, in an extraordinary act, the Leader of the Opposition at 1:26 p.m. was busy tweeting out information that was national security, an attempt to politicise once again information that the then government had.
Order. The member for Moreton is warned. The Prime Minister has concluded his answer. The member for Wannon will resume his seat. There's far too much noise in that first answer. There's far too much noise. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the member for Hasluck.
Thank you. Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government ensuring that our economy will make more things here and be strong and secure? And what alternative approaches has the government rejected?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Hasluck for her question and for welcoming me to her electorate so recently. At the heart of our Future Made in Australia plan is a clear vision. We want Australia to make more things here. Yeah. Now, I would have thought that should have been pretty uncontroversial. But at this stage, both the Coalition and their broader friends in the Coalition, the Greens, are all saying that they won't support the Future Made in Australia legislation. legislation which could make Australia a renewable energy superpower, legislation to make our economy more resilient and more secure, making it easier for companies to invest in new projects and create new jobs here, making the most of our natural resources but also making the most of our talent, our labour skills, which I have here as well. This is about an optimistic approach to where Australia is headed. Our respect for Australian scientists and innovators, our belief in the boundless potential of our regions and our resources. But some on the opposite side do want to continue to talk Australia down. We want to build Australia up. The member for New England last week in his contribution, always worth listening to,
Herbert will cease to eject
said this: if your plan was so good, there are some very big companies out there, multiple billion-dollar companies, and these people would be lined up at the door to come to Australia. Siemens, BMW, Hewlett-Packard, Rolls-Royce, General Motors, General Electric would be lined up. We're going to Australia. Not one of them wants to come here, is what he said. Well, in fact, Siemens, in a release, 8th of May 2024, said this: Siemens and Ampcontrol, a leading Australian provider of energy solutions, announced a collaboration agreement to work on technology solutions for battery energy storage and grid applications for the Australian renewable energy market. General Electric, on the 19th of February, GE Vernova's Gas Power Business and Energy Australia announced the opening of Tallawarra B Power Station in New South Wales. This, of course, marks the first dual-fuel capable natural gas hydrogen power plant in commercial operation in Australia. General Motors, 10th of October 2022, GM is expected to invest up to $69 million in Queensland Pacific Metals. There it is, in Townsville. Hewlett-Packard, 7th of December 2022. Hewlett-Packard Enterprises opened a new IT facility in Lake Macquarie. Mr Speaker, we're determined to attract businesses both here and from around the world to invest in a future made in Australia. That's what our optimistic plan's about. We'll leave the carping and the negativity to those opposite.
Just reminding the member for Moreton and O'Connor are now on warnings. The call to the honourable member for Wannon.
My question is to the Prime Minister. On Sky yesterday, the Minister for Industry said the government was issuing visitor visas from terrorist-controlled Gaza because it was faster and less rigorous. I quote, "Refugee visas take longer, and given what's happening right now and the dangers presented, the view was to try and get people out as quickly as you can." Isn't this why Australians are disappointed in the Prime Minister and now saying he is incompetent and dishonest?
Order. 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 Just members on my left. I want to hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, I defer to your earlier ruling that you made at the request of the Manager for Opposition Business about language in the House, which had you not made that ruling at the request of the Manager of Opposition Business, this question probably would be something that's within the parliamentary debate back and forth. But the opposition asked that this sort of language be ruled out, and I recommend it is.
Look, I just want to deal with character descriptions in general, okay? Because this is a feature that keeps coming up time and time, particularly with descriptors. So I'm going to address the issue of character descriptions in questions. These have been ruled out of order in past, including by myself, and they're not appropriate. So from now on, just so that everyone's clear, there'll be no words in questions describing a character reference to a minister or a Prime Minister. So I'm giving clear warnings, and I'm following earlier practice that has happened by previous speakers. I've taken this approach on the 1st of August, Speaker Smith on the 18th of March 2021 and Speaker Jenkins on the 2nd of June 2021. Order. So just so that everyone is crystal clear, including the Leader of the Opposition, if you put a character description at the end of the question, it's going to be ruled out of order and we'll move to the next question. Okay? The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. thank the member for Wannon for his question. And of course, Alex Dyson knows all about the member for Wannon, and we'll be interested to see what happens at the next election when people make a judgment about his character.
Order.
About his character.
Order. Order.
But if I were the member for Wannon, I'd be knocking on doors.
The Prime Minister will return
I'd be
to the
door
question.
knocking on the weekend.
Order. The member for Barker. No, order. Members on my... Member
If
for
he
Barker.
gets around to nominating, Mr Speaker, I give you some advice. Don't leave it to the New South Wales branch. Mr Speaker, the worst thing about this is that the member for Wannon should know better.
The member for Barker.
He should know, and does know, of course, that Israel in fact closed the Rafah border crossing in May. He knows also that the ASIO director has said very clearly, spoken about the responsibility that politicians have with their language. He knows that full well. He also knows the diligent way that our security agencies do their job, the diligent way. And he should also know that the risk of serious division that the ASIO Director-General has warned about. I'm asked also about interviews on Sky News. I hope also that he saw the interview from Mariam Dawas, a Gazan refugee, in an interview with Tom Connell and Andrew Clennell. She had this to say: "It was a long journey. We were hopeful that we would come to a place of peace and that we are here in Australia, living here. It was a very, very hard experience. I lost my dad. We lost our dad during the war because of a lack of medical care, and we weren't able to get him to the hospital." She went on to say, "I've lived my life in Gaza. I don't have any political affiliation with any of the political parties in Gaza." She went on to say, "I am myself a journalist. My sisters are doctors and dentists. I have a dentist brother and a dentist sister. So we are not the exception. I mean, all the people in Gaza, very normal people, not terrorists." She went on to say very clearly, "I wouldn't support killing civilians in any way, so I was against what happened on the 7th of October. This is a real human being. A real human being with real family here.
Order. The Leader of the Opposition. Order. The Leader of the Opposition will cease his interjection.
The Leader of the Opposition reminds the parliament that they did bring in 12,000 people, and we didn't play politics with it."
Order. 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 When the House comes, when the House comes to the Leader of the Opposition, we're just going to take the order. We're going to take the temperature down. The Minister for the Environment is not helping the situation. We're just going to take the temperature down in the House today. It's far too high. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Speaker. And my question's to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government's responsible economic management helping in the fight against inflation? And what approaches has the government ruled out?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Those opposite might not care about the cost of living, but the member for Newcastle does. This side of the parliament does. That's why it's the #1 focus of this side of the House. It's why we're rolling out tax cuts for every taxpayer, energy bill relief for every household, cheaper medicines, cheaper early childhood education, better pay and more rent assistance. It's why the ABS says that inflation would be higher were it not for the cost of living help that we put in the budget. Our cost of living help is a key part of the fight against inflation, but not the only part. We've also turned 2 big Liberal deficits into 2 big Labor surpluses, and we've made the coming deficit smaller than we inherited from the incompetence over there, Mr Speaker. Our responsible economic management is particularly important when our economy is soft and there's a lot of uncertainty in the global economy. Weakness in the Chinese economy and the big fall we've seen in iron ore prices are another reminder that we aren't immune from global economic volatility. That's why we take such a cautious and conservative approach to resource prices and revenue when we're putting our budgets together, and it's why we bank much more of any upside than our opponents used to do, Mr Speaker. Now, government spending is obviously not the primary determinant of prices in our economy, but our responsible economic management is helping, not hampering, the fight against inflation. In this regard, Mr Speaker, Governor Bullock made three very important points about governments and about working together with the Reserve Bank. The first point she said was that the government and the Reserve Bank are completely aligned. The second point that she has made in the last few weeks and months is that our surpluses are helping the fight against inflation. The third point she made is that public spending is not the main game when it comes to inflation. The governor's testimony on Friday completely obliterated all of the dishonesty that we hear from those opposite and repeated by others. These are the same people who left us inflation much higher and rising, a budget full of waste and rorts and much bigger deficits. And now they want higher inflation and higher interest rates and lower wages and less help for people because they hope that nobody will notice that we're into the third year of a three-year term and they don't have any credible or costed economic policies. They don't want anyone to notice that what they've said about nuclear and housing and supermarkets will push prices up, not down, and make things worse. And they don't want to come clean on their $315 billion of cuts and what those cuts would mean for Medicare, for pensions and for our economy more broadly. Mr Speaker, we are providing cost-of-living help that they don't support, surpluses that they could not deliver, and responsible economic management they wouldn't know the first thing about and that they couldn't be bothered asking about.
Order. Give the call to the member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure. The Senate inquiry into Darwin's Middle Arm project heard from the Northern Territory's Chief Minister that a petrochemical factory could be established there. And the gas company Tamboran has told the ASX they have exclusive rights to build a gas export terminal at Middle Arm with gas fracked out of the Beetaloo Basin. So in light of this, will your government now withdraw its $1.5 billion fossil fuel subsidy for the Middle Arm project, or is fracking the NT part of the Albanese government's future made in Australia?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. I also note the Senate inquiry is yet to report on the Middle Arm inquiry, so thank you for preempting that. Can I say very clearly that Darwin in particular in the Northern Territory is one of the few capital cities that does not have a significant industrial precinct. It does not have. What the Northern Territory government is seeking to do is to secure its economic future. Northern Territory is heavily reliant, in fact I think almost 80% of its funding for schools, for hospitals, for roads, is because it cannot generate income in its own right. So Middle Arm is about trying to provide that opportunity. You know, we have an industrial precincts, we have huge ones in Melbourne, in my home state. Every single capital city has those. So Middle Arm is about trying to take the advantage of the energy future that is needed for this country and bring that advantage into the Northern Territory and provide the people of the Northern Territory with jobs, new jobs and an economic revenue stream that allows them to fund hospitals, schools and First Nations peoples.
Give the call to the member for McEwen.
The question is the Minister for Industry and Science. Why is it important that Australia is a country that makes things, and how is the government's future Made in Australia plan delivering on that ambition? What approaches has the government rejected?
Call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thank you, Speaker, and thanks to the member for McEwen for that question, because he knows that everyone on this side of the House, as everyone on this side of the House does, a secure, well-paying job, crucial in confronting cost-of-living pressures, that a country that makes things also makes secure, well-paying jobs. And there was a bit of good news in last week's average weekly earnings figures showing that manufacturing workers doing better since we took office. Average manufacturing worker pay has gone up by 14%, from around $76,000 to about $87,000. And on top of that, our cost of living tax cuts, manufacturing workers will take home an extra $1,900 along with those wage increases, earning more and keeping more of what they earn.
900,000 manufacturing workers who know that the Albanese government's got their back because we back Australian manufacturing, and that's exactly what the Future Made in Australia Act aims to do. Now, on this side of the House, Mr Speaker, our commitment to manufacturing solid. On the other side, they only ever talk about manufacturing to talk it down. Track record appalling. Saw off 100,000 manufacturing jobs. You had a former Defence Minister in David Johnson say of the ASC he wouldn't trust them to build a canoe. What a slap in the face for Australian defence manufacturing. You had a treasurer at this very dispatch box, Joe Hockey, goad Australian car manufacturers offshore. And you've got another New South Wales Liberal in the form of Andrew Constance, who wants to join that mob in this place. Look at his track record. Now, you might remember he was the person who quits one seat, says they'll run for another, then says he won't before deciding to run for another seat. Great conviction politician. He too doesn't back Australian manufacturing, saying we don't have it and there's a reason for it. And he's absolutely right, their lack of conviction. Industry policy written on a white flag. He was the guy who sent bus manufacturing offshore, train manufacturing offshore, ferry manufacturing offshore, and the only problem was when the trains and the ferries came back, they wouldn't fit on the tracks and they kind of didn't fit under the bridges. No problem with that. Wanting to join that colossus of conviction, wanting to join another one, the Shadow Treasurer, whose heartwarming log cabin story of being a manufacturing worker for decades, got to say I love that one. He boldly claimed that the coalition always supported manufacturing. Said that right there, said it on the floor of the House, then turns up at the ABC studios to say, and I quote, "You can't build things competitively in this country." So he says they back manufacturing here, then goes down there and says that. So, as I've always said, their heart's not in it. They don't believe in Australian manufacturing except for a photo op. Australian manufacturing workers deserve better.
The call to the honourable member for Page.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Australians are feeling disappointed in the Prime Minister and questioning his competence and honesty when the Director-General of Security was asked on Insiders about those from terrorist-controlled Gaza getting visas to enter Australia. He said, quote, "There might be times when they don't get referred to us in time." How can Australians have any confidence that this has not occurred for any of the visas granted to those entering Australia from Gaza?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question, but I don't thank him for undermining the position of the Director-General of ASIO. I don't thank him for that, because no matter where a person comes from or what visa they hold, our security agencies are involved in the process. We trust their expertise. We take the same advice from the same security agencies, even the same security personnel as the previous government. Now, we've rejected more than 7,000 visa applications. There are around about 1,300 people who have come here from the occupied Palestinian territories. I remind the member that the Rafah boarding crossing is controlled by the Israeli and Egyptian authorities. Let's be clear about what's happening here. That border crossing closed in May. In May. Did they say anything about it in May? In June? In July? The beginning of August? Not a peep. Not a peep from the member for Page, who's so passionate about this issue that he's now had multiple questions about this. About this.
Page has asked his question.
3 months later, they have a call for a ban on anyone from Gaza coming to Australia, even though then there's been an attempt to redefine what was said during that Sky News interview. It's up to those opposites to explain why it is that they were silent about all of this for all of that time. It was just on the day when we welcomed Olympians home that the Leader of the Opposition chose, once again, to remind Australians that there's no moment which is too big for him to show just how small he is.
Call to Order. The honourable member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories. What support is the Albanese Labor government providing to local government, including in my home state of New South Wales? How does this compare to other approaches to local government?
The call to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
Thank you, and I thank the member for Gilmore for her question. Not only is she a great advocate for her electorate, she knows how important it is to support local councils to deliver priority projects across her electorate. And on this side of the House, we value the work that our councils are doing, and we know how important it is to deliver funds to help them do their work. It's why we're progressively doubling roads to recovery. And in the member for Gilmore's electorate, that will mean an extra $13.3 million over the next 5 years, bringing her total roads to recovery budget for councils to $30.8 million. It's a program that automatically goes out to councils every year, no need for a colour-coded spreadsheet, because local government is in every town, in every village and in every city across the country. And when those opposite had the ability to help local councils, did they? No, they froze indexation on financial assistance grants, which has led to a funding shortfall across the country. And of the 440 local people who wanted to run for council, did the New South Wales Liberal Party support them? No. Only 281 of those candidates are actually going to be nominated. Many of those people had already started campaigning. John Doherty, a Wollongong mayoral hopeful, shared the disappointment that his party couldn't get a form in on time, and he said a few of my colleagues are beside themselves. They've had the rug pulled from under them. It's mind-boggling, to be honest. But wait, there's more. And Utopia could not have scripted this. The irony of the New South Wales Liberals demanding that the Electoral Commission adhere to a deadline imposed by them when they couldn't adhere to a deadline that's been posted on a publicly available website for close to a year. But hey, let us have a crack at building and running nuclear energy power plants. Yeah, nah. Now they're attacking each other, and over the weekend we've seen former New South Wales Premier Mike Baird say, "For me, when I think of administrative challenges or stuff-ups, this is at the top of the list." And the current New South Wales opposition leader Mark Speakman said, "It's a basic matter of competence and administration." In fact, it is incompetence and maladministration, but hardly surprising from a group of people who look to blame other people all the time. This is the party that gave us robo-debt. It gave us multiple ministries. It gave us doctored paperwork rolled out by the member for Hume, purporting to be from a council.
Order.
And who can forget,
the minister will,
I don't hold a hose, mate.
The minister will just pause. The member for Page on a point of order, and this better be a relevant point of order.
The point of order might not surprise you, Speaker. Relevance. She's just dished out on the previous government. She hasn't answered the question which was relevant to what maybe her government was doing.
The order. The minister was asked about to compare to other approaches. I'll just ask her to draw her back to the question for the remaining 18 seconds.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And if you're buying this pattern of chaos and mismanagement from those opposite, I'll throw in a free set of steak knives. Because if you are putting yourselves out there to run a country, try to get the basics right. And a form should be pretty basic.
Order. No, the member for Page has been continually interjecting right throughout question time. He's had a very good go. He'll leave the chamber under 94A. Order. Order. As I said, there's far too much noise. The member for Warren has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Was security advice sought from ASIO before the government made the unprecedented decision to grant tourist visas to people from the Gaza war zone?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. No matter where a person comes from or what visa they hold, our security agencies are involved in the process and we trust their expertise. We take the same advice from the same security agencies as the previous government.
The call to order. Members on my left will cease interjecting immediately. Give the call to the honourable member for Tangney.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government providing opportunities for Australian defence businesses after a wasted decade in defence?
Give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Well,
the member for Herbert is warned.
Can I thank the member for his question and acknowledge his local support to Australia's defence industry. On Thursday in Washington, President Biden completed the last step in the establishment of a licence-free defence export zone between America, the United Kingdom and Australia. And this is the achievement of a generational dream. It will open the door for more Australian companies to participate in the American defence supply chain. Companies like Veeam in the member's own electorate, which makes precision alloy components for US Navy ships and employs 200 people in high-tech, high-skilled, well-paid jobs. This will also make it much easier for technology to flow from America to Australia, which is so critical for Australia's building of our future submarines, but which is also important in other areas like the guided weapons and explosive ordnance enterprise. Lockheed Martin will begin the manufacture of guided land-based rockets in Australia from next year. And this is a direct result of the work that we've been doing with the United States, along with a more than $16 billion investment over the next decade. And this is such a contrast between what this government is doing and the smoke and mirrors that we were so used to from those opposite, because the Liberals only allocated $1 billion towards GWIO, which meant that there was no realistic prospect of seeing the manufacture of guided weapons in this country for more than a decade. Now, when it comes to matching Labor's increased defence spending, the Shadow Minister for Defence is desperately clinging on to a text that he's received from his beloved leader. But as to his text to the Shadow Treasurer, well, there he is definitely being left on red, because the Shadow Treasurer has made abundantly clear that coalition defence spending will stay within the envelope which they took to the last election. And that means that there is a $50 billion difference between what's in Labor's budgets and what's on the coalition's books. And that means that the Liberals are now dangerously close to the kind of failure that, to quote the Shadow Minister, would be leaving Australia's defences so weak that we provoke aggression. Well, on this side of the House, we're making concrete decisions to improve our nation's defences so that we can keep Australians safe.
Before I call the Leader of the Opposition, the member for Herbert was on a warning. I didn't want to interrupt during the answer, but he interjected 4 times since on a warning, and as there are consequences for actions, he'll leave the chamber under 94A. So if you're on a warning, it's definitely not smart to interject. Give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that no other government in Australian history has brought people from a war zone controlled by a listed terrorist organisation on a tourist visa without the requisite checks and balances that would normally be conducted on a refugee and humanitarian visa?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'll make 2 points in response to this question. The first is the security standard which our security intelligence agencies apply to everyone coming to Australia doesn't stop when they're on their way here. It's ongoing, as the Leader of the Opposition would full well know.
Order.
If anyone who comes to our country is assessed to be a threat at any time to our national security, then intervention occurs and their visa gets cancelled. If anyone who comes to our country undermines our laws, they get dealt with our law enforcement. We trust our security agencies and law enforcement to do their jobs. I make this point as well, Mr Speaker, well, 2 further ones. In the financial year that the conflict began after Russia's illegal and immoral invasion of Ukraine, the previous government issued... I cannot be more specific.
All right. All right. The Prime Minister will pause and we'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr Speaker, it's on relevance. It was a very tight question. Can the Prime Minister give an honest answer? There has never been a period in Australian history...
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. The member for Moreton, I hope, was not interjecting. The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, unusually in this question, it invited a bit of history to be told, and that makes what the Prime Minister is providing now exactly in order.
I'll deal with this. On the further to the point of order.
Further to the point of order raised by the Leader of the House, the question was, can the Prime Minister confirm that no other government in Australian history has brought people from a war zone controlled by a listed terrorist organisation on tourist visas? How can the Prime Minister be relevant? And the point made by the Leader of the Opposition, by the Leader of the House, has no relevance whatsoever to the point made.
Resume your seat. Order. The question contained an element about the history of this subject. The Prime Minister was in the middle of explaining what has happened in the past, and obviously he'll need to make that directly relevant to the question, not just a history lesson. Order. No, the Leader of the Opposition has been given the courtesy with his point of order and was heard in silence and respected. I'm asking the same. Prime Minister, in continuation.
Mr Speaker. In the financial year that the conflict began after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the previous government issued 10,000 visitor visas. Now, some of those might have been before or after that conflict began, but that's the figure for the financial year. And I'll make this point too, Mr Speaker, that during their entire time in office, they issued, under the former government, more than 1,000 visitor visas to Palestinians from the occupied Palestinian territories.
Order. No, the Leader of the Opposition. The Leader of the Opposition.
What is wrong with you? Something wrong with you?
Order. Order. No. Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting immediately. Prime Minister will ignore the interjections, and the Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting to assist the House. Just conclude this answer in a respectful way.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. There are two separate points. During their time in office, they issued more than 1,000 visitor visas to Palestinians from the occupied Palestinian territories. During that entire time, Hamas controlled the Gaza Strip. They took over in 2006, and they were in charge in Gaza. So I can't be more in line with what the question was. Mr Speaker, their hypocrisy is just extraordinary.
Order.
Just extraordinary.
Order.
So apparently, I'll take the interjection, Mr Speaker.
That's when it started.
Apparently, under this Leader of the Opposition, thinks that Hamas became bad on October 7th.
That's right.
And before then, they were OK. It was all hunky-dory. Well, Hamas have been the enemy, not just of Israel, but of the Palestinian people as well. As well. You know, the hypocrisy is just extraordinary, Mr Speaker. When the Leader of the Opposition challenged Malcolm Turnbull, he said this: "It's good to be in front of the cameras where I can smile and maybe show a different side to what I show when I talk about border protection."
Concluded. Order. The Prime Minister's time has concluded. The House comes to order. We'll hear from the member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. What is standing in the way of the government's urgent action to clean up the CFMEU?
Give a call to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for the question.
On my left, the member for O'Connor.
Last week, I referred to the 3 o'clock deadline that was coming. I made sure I got the question in before 3 o'clock because I presumed there was some chance by the time we got there that the opposition might not vote to protect John Setka and the CFMEU. But after 3 o'clock came, the senators, controlled by the Leader of the Opposition, all lined up and voted with the Greens to make sure that at least another week was given to the current leadership of the CFMEU. At least one more week. But they haven't even committed to making a decision this week. Is it another week? Is it another month? How long are they willing to do it? Yeah, the Shadow Treasurer, and I'll take that one, he's saying, are we now going to give money to the CFMEU? No, we're not. No, we're not. The idea is not to give money to them, it's to take power from the current leadership. That's the idea. How much longer do they want to give the current leadership? Another month of protecting outlaw bikie gangs, another month of criminality, another month of bullying, intimidation and thuggery. John Davies, the CEO of the Australian Contractors Association, made it clear.
No,
he said we're at a critical juncture.
The Leader will pause for a sec. Okay. The yelling, the screaming will stop immediately because a general warning is now issued. This is not acceptable. Members on my left, the complete disrespect is untenable. Okay, so moving forward, anyone now is on a general warning. You won't be warned, you'll just be asked to leave. The Minister will be heard in silence.
John Davies put the case clearly and directed at the opposition. We're at a critical juncture where the uncertainty surrounding the content and timing of an administration is beginning to have tangible effects on the industry, both in terms of project outcomes and business operations. The industry cannot afford continued uncertainty, so we call on all parties to finalise and pass the bill without further delay. But those opposite, if it's a choice between getting something fixed and having a fight, the Leader of the Opposition will always choose the fight over the fix. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Yeah, Kerry Packer said you only get one Alan Bond in your lifetime. Well, I reckon John Setka's worked out you only get one Peter Dutton in your lifetime. You only get one Leader of the Opposition in your lifetime. That's all you get. And I want to see what the next tattoo is. Apparently the neck's all taken. But maybe on one knuckle you could get LOVE, and on the other knuckle he might get PETE, because no one has done the worst parts of that leadership the favours that the Leader of the Opposition is doing to them right now.
Before I call the member for Fowler, I'll just do a couple of acknowledgements in the chamber. I inform the House that present in the gallery today is Mr Lee Waters MC, member of the Welsh Parliament for the Lunalea constituency. He is at the Parliament today for an event with the Parliamentary Friends of Cycling. The co-chairs the member for Swan, Indi and Fisher. And we have Ms Moti Fahad Hafid, member of the House of Representatives of Indonesia and the current chair of the First Commission of the House of Representatives. And joining them is the Indonesian ambassador to Australia, His Excellency Ambassador Dr Siswo Pramano. And also in the gallery today are delegates of the 2024 Australia-India Youth Dialogue, being held in Canberra this week, whose theme this year is Future of Leadership. Alumni of the dialogue include our very own Minister for Aged Care and Sport, the Minister for Defence and Defence Personnel and Veterans Affairs, and the Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs. A warm welcome to you all. And now I give the call to the honourable member for Fowler.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure. The city's northwest metro was opened today, yet in the fastest-growing areas of Sydney's southwest, with the highest disadvantaged population and a new airport, people are paying more for tolls to travel, more taxes on fuel levy, has poor rail connectivity and sitting on freeways that are looking more like large car parking lots. When will the government commit to building the much-needed east-west metro that will service and connect the people of Western Sydney to jobs and growth opportunities?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, and can I thank the member for Fowler for her question, and I acknowledge the 62,000 taxpayers in her electorate who received a tax cut on the 1st of July and the 61,000 households receiving energy relief. We, of course, on this side of the House know how important Western Sydney is, not just for New South Wales but for the prosperity of our entire nation. As the Prime Minister has said before, Western Sydney is changing. It is changing dramatically, and it's changing dramatically as a result of the investments that are being made to really turn Sydney to the west. It used to focus on the east when it's looking for jobs, and now a lot of the jobs are coming from the west. It's a powerhouse of the New South Wales economy, but the economy of the entire nation. It's why in the budget we committed nearly $2 billion for infrastructure, specifically in Western Sydney. It's why, overall, we're spending $17.3 billion. We're building the airport. It's over 80% complete. I was there just recently with the topping out of the terminal, which is looking terrific, and we'll have more to say about the airport shortly. We're also investing in the metro, those train stations, not just to connect the airport but also to connect those important economic zones. And we've also invested in the road infrastructure to connect the airports to other parts of Western Sydney. But of course, the other projects that we've invested in are 5.2, as I said, for Sydney Metro, $500 million for Mamre Road Stage 2, $400 million for Elizabeth Drive, $260 million, obviously matched by the New South Wales Government, for Richmond Road, $286 million to upgrade Mulgoa Road Stages 1 and 2, $570 million for the Moorebank Intermodal Project, which is taking the equivalent of 3,000 heavy vehicles off Sydney roads, $128 million for Dunheved Road in Penrith, $190 million to upgrade the Moorebank Avenue and Hume Highway intersections, $100 million for Western Sydney rapid bus infrastructure upgrades, $95 million to Horsley Drive. We are absolutely committed to making sure that Western Sydney is the powerhouse not just of New South Wales but the whole of the nation's economy.
Give a call to the honourable member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. After 40 years, how important is Medicare for Australians? What have been the threats to Medicare, and why is it important to strengthen Medicare for the future?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you to the member for Lyons. As such a terrific advocate for better health care, particularly in rural and regional Australia. And a few months ago, he joined the Prime Minister and me and many others besides to celebrate the 40th anniversary of Medicare, because for Labor and for Australians who've come to cherish our most important social program, it was indeed a celebration. Medicare has delivered this country one of the best healthcare systems on the planet, Mr Speaker. It's ranked #1 for health outcomes and, importantly, for Labor, #1 for health equity as well. But it's notable there's been no celebration on the other side, Mr Speaker, not a single murmur, because they never wanted Medicare to survive for 40 years, let alone to thrive. We remember John Howard describing Medicare, get this, as one of the great failures of the Hawke government. That's what the godfather of modern Liberal Party said. And even after they finally accepted that the Australian people would simply not accept them abolishing Medicare, they've never stopped trying to dismantle and weaken the program year after year, like the Leader of the Opposition freezing the Medicare rebate or trying to rip $50 billion out of our public hospitals. But, Mr Speaker, it's bulk billing that's always really offended them. John Howard called it an absolute rort. The Leader of the Opposition said there were too many free Medicare services before he tried to abolish bulk billing altogether. But for Labor, Mr Speaker, bulk billing is the beating heart of the Medicare program, and that is why last year we tripled the bulk billing incentive. And since that record investment in November, Mr Speaker, we've seen bulk billing for GP visits rise in every single state and every single territory. And the member for Lyons will be very pleased that the biggest increase of all has been in the state of Tasmania, where bulk billing is up by more than 7%, Mr Speaker. Across the nation, in just 8 months, there have been more than 3 million additional free visits to the doctor. In June, there were more than 900,000 additional free visits to the doctor, the same number in May, just 1 month alone, making a real difference to millions of Australians, Mr Speaker. But we know that Medicare is still under very real pressure. We know there's a lot more for us to do to keep strengthening Medicare, Mr Speaker, but we also know that all of that progress on urgent care clinics, on bulk billing, on making medicines cheaper, it is all under real threat by those opposite. The Shadow Treasurer confirmed again last week, Mr Speaker, he doesn't support any of that additional investment. All of that investment in bulk billing, it'll go. The urgent clinics will close. And as for the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker, well, you just need to look at his record.
The call to the honourable member for Wannon.
Thanks, Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Immigration. Has any visa of any of the 1,300 people who are in Australia from the Gaza war zone on tourist visas been cancelled?
Give the call to the Leader of the House.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. What the government does, and a lot of attention's been given to when visas are first issued, where the process is the same as it's always been, but the government continues to collect information, and we never stop collecting information on this caseload or anyone who has visas. If at any point in time we're presented with information that had grounds for visa cancellation, we would cancel.
The call to the honourable member for Higgins.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to make the higher education system better and fairer for more students?
Give the call to the Minister for Education.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my friend, the fantastic member for Higgins, for her question. Mr Speaker, we're wiping $3 billion of student debt for more than 3 million Australians, including more than 26,000 people in the member for Higgins electorate. That legislation is in the parliament right now and it will be debated this week. It means for someone with an average HECS debt of about $26,000, their debt will be reduced by about $1,200. For someone with a HECS debt of, say, $45,000, it'll cut their debt by about $2,000. When the legislation passes, the ATO will automatically apply this to your student loan. And if you've paid off your loan since the 1st of June last year, you will get a tax credit. It's an important part of making HECS fairer. But it's not the only thing that this legislation does. It also provides financial support for teaching students, for nursing students, for midwifery students and social work students while they do their practical training. And it also massively expands those fee-free courses that are like a bridging course between school and university to give you those foundational skills you need to start a university degree. It's all part of building a better and a fairer education system. Under Bob Hawke and Paul Keating, the number of students finishing high school jumped from 40% to almost 80%, and that was nation-changing stuff. And now we need to take the next step. That's why we've set ourselves a target as a country that by the middle of this century it won't just be 80% of young people that have finished school, but 80% that have got a TAFE qualification or a university degree as well. And to do that, we've got to break down that invisible barrier that stops a lot of young people from the bush, from the regions, from the outer suburbs, from getting a crack at university in the first place. And that requires big changes to our universities. It also requires us to fix the funding of public schools and tie that to practical reforms like catch-up tutoring. And that's why I was pleased to see the Leader of the Nationals back the action that the government wants to take on this on television yesterday, proving once again that he is the driving force on policy in the opposition, and I welcome his support for our reforms to school education. I genuinely do. I know that he gets it, and I hope that he will support the changes we're making to wipe more than $3 billion in student debt, to provide financial support for teaching students and nursing students, social work students and midwifery students, to help to make sure that more kids from the bush and from the suburbs get a crack at university, and hopefully, just like everything else, he can persuade the Liberal Party to support it as well.
Give the call to the honourable member for Warringah.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister for Immigration and Multicultural Affairs. The Multicultural Framework Review is a generational reform agenda requiring a whole-of-government and community approach that will position Australia to realise its full potential as a nation made up of many cultures, faiths and lived experiences. We often rightly call out anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, but too rarely racism, and especially racist policy. The review called on the government and all citizens to actively combat racism, which is still experienced by far too many. How will you ensure policies do not prejudice and lead to vilification of minority groups?
Give the call to the Leader of the House.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Warringah for the question. The Multicultural Framework is an important document following a long period of consultation, and I pay tribute to the Minister for Skills for all the work that he did in making sure that we have that available for Australia. It starts with a simple view that we are better together. That's the simplicity of it. That the fact that we need, quite properly, to have rules around making sure everybody is safe does not disqualify us from also making sure people feel welcome. And so you have a series of issues. One are the messages that the government sends. Simply having the multicultural framework at all is an important thing. Secondly, some of the funding measures that have been decided on that flow from that give particularly some of the emerging communities a better capacity is important work as well. And effectively you end up with three sorts of events. You get some events where people get to celebrate their heritage, other events where it's one big celebration and we all celebrate it together, and other opportunities to learn from each other and to understand each other's stories. And you need to thread through all of those. But the other part of it, which is we've spoken about the way we talk, and you've referred to racism, but the way we talk very much in the context of the recommendations from the Director-General of ASIO. And that's important. It's also a conversation that really did begin long before that. And if there is one thing that I hope we have now resolved, I hope we have put away the arguments that we had to deal with for 9 long years of being told that we needed to lower our protections against racial hate speech. And those comments were made by some people who are now very senior critics. It was the Leader of the Opposition who wanted those protections lowered and said they don't want, the Australian people don't want to have officials out of Canberra jamming some sort of language code down their throat. That was the response to hate speech. Senator Patterson said if it was up to me, we'd put an 18C repeal bill every day of the week until it passes. The now Shadow Minister for Defence said that's why we have defamation law. We don't need 18C to sort these issues out. And I put to those who are in a similar position to me and to the member for Warringah, neither you nor me, member for Warringah, will experience racism at any point in our lives in Australia. But our neighbours will and our friends will. And words can be bullets. And what might seem like a great way for some people to get a headline, none of us should underestimate the harm it does not just to those individuals but to the fabric of the nation.
Give a call to the honourable member. Order. Members on my left and right will cease interjecting. The member for O'Connor. I'd like to hear from the member for Chisholm.
Thanks so much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How is Labor's Homes for Australia plan helping address the housing pressures Australians face, and what is standing in the way?
We call to the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Homelessness.
Thank you, Speaker, and can I thank the member for Chisholm for her question. She is an incredible advocate for her local community, and we are very lucky to have her representing the eastern and southeastern suburbs of Melbourne. Speaker, we have a housing crisis in our country which is affecting the lives of millions of Australians. It's renters who are copying too many rent increases that are too high. It's that experience of being a renter where people aren't getting the security they need, especially if they've got children and pets. And it's that sense that home ownership is slipping away for a generation of young people who deserve so much better from their country. Now, for a decade, the Commonwealth stepped back and basically refused to engage in the housing issue in our country. We are taking a different approach. Today, our country is led by a Prime Minister whose entire life trajectory was reshaped by the access he got in his childhood to safe and affordable housing. So, of course, Speaker, under the Albanese government, we are back in the housing game. Now, since we were elected Speaker, in that 2 years, we have invested $32 billion in this critical national challenge. And I just want to give you a sense of the profound difference in energy and focus that housing is getting under our government. Our government invested more in housing in our last budget than the entire 9 years that the Coalition were in power. Speaker, I really want people to hear this. We spent more in one budget than the entire 9 years that the Coalition governed this country. Now, Speaker, big picture, the answer to Australia's housing problems is that we need to build more homes in our country. And so what the Prime Minister has done is sat down with the states and said we need a bold and ambitious goal of building 1.2 million homes across our country over the coming 5 years. But we also recognise, Speaker, of course, that people need help now. And that's why you've seen our government execute on these 2 back-to-back increases to Commonwealth rent assistance. That's the first time this has happened in 30 years, Speaker. I want to point to the support the government has offered to first home buyers. 110,000 first home buyers have been helped into the market under our government through the Home Guarantee Scheme. Now, we cannot build the kind of response to this crisis that's needed without a new kind of partnership with the states and territories. And next week, I'm doing something that didn't happen for the last 5 years that the Coalition were in power, and that is bringing together the state housing ministers. We're going to sit down together in Western Sydney and work out how we can turbocharge our response to this crisis. This is an incredibly dynamic group of ministers. Well, I'll take the interjection because the Leader of the Opposition says it's a revolution. You know, it would have really helped us if something had been done about this problem in the 10 years that those opposite were in power. Now they come into the parliament, make a lot of complaints and stand in the path of progress in the Senate, Speaker.
Call to the honourable member for Wannon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration. Is the Minister aware of any concerns from security or intelligence agencies about any of the 1,300 people who have arrived in Australia from the Gaza war zone?
Give the call to the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, if I can understand the question, he's asking just here in the privacy of question time, where no one else is listening, just between you and me, let's have a conversation about national security conversation and ASIO's information. No, if you want to be irresponsible, that's on you.
Has the Minister concluded his answer? Has the Minister concluded his answer? We'll move to the next question. Order. Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the member for Wills.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Why is the cost of living relief at the centre of the Albanese Labor government's economic plan, and how does it compare with other approaches?
Good question.
Give the call to the Treasurer.
I appreciate the question from the member for Wills, who cares deeply about the pressures that his constituents are under, and he represents them really ably in this place. Now, Mr Speaker, this is another question time where those opposite have completely vacated the field on inflation and on the economy. Mr Speaker, the Shadow Treasurer sits there. They won't even give him a turn on the dog whistle, Mr Speaker. Everyone else gets a turn on the dog whistle except for the Shadow Treasurer, Mr Speaker. Now, we care about the cost of living on this side of the House, even if those opposite don't. We know that people are doing it tough, and that's why we are doing something about it. Tax cuts for every taxpayer, energy bill relief for every household, help with medicines and rent and early childhood education, and a pay rise for people who need it, Mr Speaker. And this goes to the biggest difference between that side of the House and this side of the House. We're trying to help people with the cost of living. They're trying to divide and diminish people, Mr Speaker. They care more about starting culture wars than finishing the fight against inflation. Now, Mr Speaker, this is the most divisive opposition leader that we have seen, and that should disqualify him from the Prime Ministership of a great country like ours. He has decades of form when it comes to divisive rhetoric, which divides our community and makes Australians less safe, not more safe, Mr Speaker. Now, everyone in here and out there should understand his strategy, Mr Speaker. Let's be very clear. These culture wars are all designed to distract from the fact that he has no economic credibility whatsoever. He thinks if he starts a culture war and divides our community, nobody will notice that we're in the third year of a three-year parliamentary term and he still has no credible or costed economic policies whatsoever. He hopes that nobody will notice that they haven't come clean on where the $315 billion in cuts are going to come from, or what it means for Medicare, or what it means for pensions, or what it means for the economy more broadly. He hopes if he starts a culture war, nobody will notice that the Shadow Treasurer just isn't up to it, Mr Speaker. And that's not just a view held on this side of the House, let me tell you, Mr Speaker. They are all about dividing the nation, not fighting inflation. They are long on conflict and they are short on credibility. They don't understand that you don't dial down the pressures that people are feeling by dialling up division in our local communities, Mr Speaker. You fight inflation with cost of living relief, with a couple of surpluses, with responsible economic management. That's our focus, Mr Speaker, even if it's not theirs.
Call to the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I ask further questions placed on the notice paper.
Order. Members on my left. We'll move to, if members can leave the chamber as quickly and as quietly as possible, move to papers. And I call the Leader of the House.
Speaker, these documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to the honourable members earlier today. Full details of the documents will be recorded in the votes and proceedings.
Just ask members to leave the chamber or remain in their places, and I will give the call to the clerk.